A macro allows you to streamline a task which would normally take several steps. The idea being the macro can do all of those steps for you in just a single click. And generally, for most users, the way we create a macro is to record ourselves performing those multiple steps that we want to streamline, and then we can assign the macro to either a keyboard shortcut or a button, so we've got a quick way to run the macro and therefore perform all of those steps just with a single click or a single press of the keyboard shortcut. Now you might remember that template that we created a couple of skills ago, which allowed us to create a brand new document based on a newsletter template. And in order to use that template, we had to do this. File, and then new, and then down to custom here, and then find our custom templates. So there it is, the CBTN newsletter. And you might also remember that we had those fill-in fields. So let me just put in Jan, for example. Click OK, and there's the brand new document based on that template. So what we're going to do is create a macro to streamline the clicks involved in going file, and then new, and then custom, and find the template. That's what we're going to capture in a macro. So I don't actually need this particular document in order to do this. That was just to show you what we're aiming for. So let me get rid of that. I'm not going to save it. And we are going to work with our macros using the developer ribbon tab. Now you should have this showing because we did switch it on when we were talking about fields and forms. You know, we were using these controls here, but just in case you don't have that showing, then make sure that you right click on the ribbon, choose to customize the ribbon, and then over on the right hand side you need to make sure that the developer ribbon tab is switched on. So just check that that is the case for you. So we're going to use the developer ribbon tab to record a macro and also view the macros and edit the macros that we're going to be working on in this particular skill. So the first thing we're going to do is click the record macro button, and this is where we need to give the macro a name. Now, macro names must begin with a letter and they cannot include spaces. So I'm going to call it new newsletter. Gosh, that's very tiny, isn't it? Let me just zoom in. Yes, I have typed that correctly. But then you'll see that I can, at this point, assign this macro that I haven't yet created to a button or to a keyboard shortcut. And of course, you can do that in real life. You could assign this yet to be produced macro to a button or a keyboard shortcut. But I have to say, I tend to prefer to just record the macro first, check it works, and then assign it to a button. So that's the way around we will do it in this short demonstration. But as you can see, you've got the opportunity to do that here. But also notice I've got some options as to where this macro is stored. And you'll see the default is that it's going to be stored on our normal template. And as you might guess, that would mean that this macro that we're about to record would therefore be available to us in all of our documents. So it's a bit like the building blocks and the quick parts that we talked about in the last skill. If we save those quick parts on the normal template, then they will be available in all of our documents. But if I click the drop down, then you'll see that I do have an alternative. I could choose to save this macro in this current document, but that's not really going to apply for this particular scenario, so we will stick with saving it into the normal template. But this is also where I would like to point out that the normal template, well, it is a template type of file, which is why the extension is DOT, but the M bit at the end there means that it's a macro enabled template. And you might have spotted when we were creating our own custom templates, you know, like the newsletter one, for example, that the extension was .dotx. That was just a regular document template, whereas normal is a macro enabled template. And that means that yes, we can save a macro onto it, which is exactly what we're going to do now. Now, I would suggest that you do put in a description, something meaningful, because macro names are a little bit restricted in terms of, you can't have spaces and whatnot. So therefore, make use of the description field to explain that this macro is going to create a new document based on the CBTN newsletter template, something like that. Let me just unzoom and click OK. And what you will see now is that your mouse pointer has got this little, well, somebody said to me the other day, why has it got that robot face attached to the mouse pointer? Well, this is where some of you younger folks out there might wonder what this is, but this is supposed to look like a little cassette tape. So imagining that you've pressed record on an old-fashioned, cassette tape recorder. So I am now recording, and it doesn't matter how long I keep chatting, it will not capture this dead time. So it's not a case of having to do it as quickly as you can can, because it'll just get rid of all the dead space in between the clicks that you want to capture. But anyway, we're now recording, so we can go File, and then New, and then Custom, and then CBTN Newsletter, and then I can just cancel this dialog box, and that's okay that that's been captured as part of the macro, because as we will see, the dialog box will still work for us when we run the macro. I am still recording, but I've kind of finished everything I need to capture, so back to the Developer ribbon tab, and let's choose Stop Recording. So let's get rid of this document that we produced while we were recording that macro. So let me just get rid of that. Now I don't need to save that. But now let's test the macro before we put it on a button. So if we go to the macros button just here, that's where it'll list for you all of the available macros. I've only got the one. You can see the description that we typed in. So I'm going to click Run just to run it. So that's, this is how I'm going to test the macro, and great. It's popped up with that fill-in fields. Let's imagine this is the Feb newsletter. Click OK. Perfect. That macro is working great. Yet again though, let me get rid of this document that I created as a kind of a byproduct of testing the macro. I don't need to save it. But now, to make it easy for us to run that macro, rather than having to go to the Developer ribbon tab and choose macros and pick it from the list, we're going to add that macro to the Quick Access toolbar up the top here. So if you right-click on your Quick Access toolbar and choose the option to customize it, and this is where you'll see choose commands from. Well, generally this is where you would go and navigate for other buttons and whatnot to put onto your Quick Access toolbar. But if you click the drop down, then rather fantastically, this is where you can pick up any macros you've got available. Of course, we've just got the one. There it is. Now you will see it's got quite a long, cumbersome looking name, and we will see a bit more where that comes from later on, but you can see straight away that the normal bit surely must indicate that this macro is stored on the normal template, because we know that, and the other end is the name that we gave it, so we can be sure that is the one that we want. So I'm going to click that and click Add. So that's going to add it to the Quick Access toolbar. But because it does look a bit ugly and it's just got this default picture, I'm going to just click it and choose to modify it. So this is where, particularly down the bottom here with the display name, you can get rid of some of the extra bits it's added to the name there, and maybe just put in a space between the two words. That means when you hover with your mouse over the button, the actual screen tip that pops up will look a bit nicer if you put the space in there. As we know, we couldn't have the space in the macro name itself, but we absolutely can have a space for the display name. And then it's quite fun. You can choose a little image here to have on the button that you think will depict the task that the macro is going to perform for us. So what do you reckon? Oh yeah, look, how about that little scroll thing? I'm going to choose that. So let me click OK. You can see that's looking better already. Click OK again. Look up at your Quick Access toolbar. There's our new button. And as we hover, let me just zoom in. You can see that yes, the little screen tip does look better because I put the space in. So now if I click it, fantastic. There's the fill-in fields. Let me just type in March. Click OK. Brilliant. But what about if you wanted to run that macro from a keyboard shortcut instead? We saw that was one of the options that we could have chosen when we first created the macro, but as I said, I didn't let you do it because I want to test the macro before I assign it to a button or to a keyboard shortcut. So if you do prefer to run your macros from a keyboard shortcut, then right-click up on your ribbon and choose to customize the ribbon, and then down here, that's where you see the opportunity to customize your keyboard shortcuts, and you specify a command from the left-hand side just here. So if you scroll down to the end, that's where you will see your list of macros. Interestingly, you'll also see your list of building blocks. So that could have been an interesting thing to play with from the last skill. But anyway, this skill is about macros. So if you choose that, there's our macro. So then you could press a new keyboard shortcut key that you wanted to be able to press in order to run that macro. But for me, I'm happy with it on the button on my Quick Access toolbar, so I'm going to just leave it at that. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from CBT Nuggets. Oh, and also, if you're new to IT or are interested in an IT career, visit cbtnuggets.com and sign up for a free, yes free, a free trial.